to find my right page. There we go. Our gospel today is from St. Luke chapter 13. Now he was teaching in one of the synagogues on the Sabbath, and just then there appeared a woman with a spirit that had crippled her for 18 years. She was bent over and quite unable to stand. When Jesus saw her, he called her over and said, "Woman, you are set free from your ailment." Then he laid his hands on her. Immediately she stood up straight and began praising God. But the leader of the synagogue, indignant because Jesus had cured on the Sabbath, kept saying to the crowd, "There are 6 days on which work ought to be done. Come on those days and be cured, and not on the Sabbath day." But the Lord answered him and said, "You hypocrites, does not each of you on the Sabbath untie his ox or his donkey from the manger and lead it away to give it water? And ought not this woman, a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan bound for 18 long years, be set free from this bondage on the Sabbath day?" When he said this, all his opponents were put to shame, and the entire crowd was rejoicing at all the wonderful things that he was doing. The gospel of the Lord. So, kind of the core we're hearing in here is healing, but it's being overridden by which commandment? Oh, the third. Remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. Yay. And from the time Moses carted that down the mountain with the other 9 commandments, there has been ongoing disagreement about why we should honor the Sabbath and how to go about keeping it holy. And there's actually biblical reason for some discussion on this, because in the book of Exodus, the Sabbath is linked to creation. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that is in them, but rested the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and consecrated it. But in Deuteronomy, we had a different reason. Remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you out from there with mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore the Lord your God commanded you to keep the Sabbath day. And in that context, the Sabbath is meant to be a gift of time. Time to rest, time for restoration, and a time to worship God. But as always happens when human hands get on God's gifts, things get changed around. And so over the years, that gift turned into law with lots of subarticles and restrictions and parameters, because that's what we do. We like to take something that should be good and open and put some limits on it, because we understand things better when there are limits on them. We don't see all that well out here. We need to see. So, this gift kind of becomes a series of restrictions. And this Sabbath, which was meant for observing and worshiping God, we still have changed our understanding. As there are a number of us here with gray enough hair that we remember blue laws. All right, most of us here. For you lucky people who are not that gray and don't remember blue, there was a time when you did not go shopping on Sunday. There was a time when the gas stations were closed. There was a time when the grocery stores were closed. There was a time when you sure as heck didn't go buy a beer on Sunday. Well, that changed because time moves forward, things change. So we don't have those restrictions, but we still have other restrictions in our understandings. Maybe not so much as in society as in our worship settings. In the Jewish tradition, the Sabbath begins on Friday evening with a lighting of candles. In our Christian tradition, for most of us, it's Sunday morning. We begin with lighting candles. Now, if you're Seventh-day Adventist, you do it on Saturday. See? Variety. But Jesus and his disciples were constantly getting into trouble because they didn't observe the standards of that time in that place for that Sabbath. And in Luke alone, there are 4 instances where this has caused conflict. And of those 4, 3 of them involve healing, which, as Kathy pointed out, shouldn't be restricted. So there. But they get called on it. But this example today, where Jesus is teaching in a synagogue, and we don't know where, it just says in a synagogue. All we know is somewhere on this trip to the cross, he's in this synagogue and he's teaching. And he does what Jesus does all the way through this travelogue we've been following. He sees someone in need. And he does what Jesus still does. When he sees someone in need, he wants to address that need. And there's this woman, and we all practice bending. I'm not going to make you do it again. There you go, you got free. I was going to make you do it. But imagine while you were standing there, if you were really, really where you ought to be, your view consisted of 2 feet. And you got to know that view really well, because that's all you could see. And that's all she had been seeing for 18 years. She had had a very limited view of the world. In addition to her other problems, it had to be painful. And it had to make her an outcast because she was certainly different. And we all know how different sells. But notice this woman did not come and approach Jesus. He sees her while he's teaching and stops his teaching and does what he thinks is more important. And he calls her over and he says, "Woman, you are set free from your ailment." And then he lays hands on her. And what he does there is he frees her from the pain. He frees her from the imprisonment of that position. He gives her a new life, free of pain, free of shame, free of isolation. But he also gives her a better view of the world. She can see where she's participating now. She's no longer just a simple cripple. She is a proud daughter of Abraham, a recipient of the promise of the covenant. She's in her rightful place. She's where God wants us all to be. And she didn't have to do anything. What Jesus does for this woman is pure grace, the same grace he offers us today. And when he touches her, what does she do? Immediately she stands up and begins praising God, because that is where the gift came from, and she knows this. So here she is on the Sabbath, praising God for this unexpected, wonderful, unbelievable gift of a new life. Does this sound vaguely familiar? It should. Jesus then has to make the point, because there's a little misunderstanding, where the Sabbath fits in here. It's not about what we shouldn't do. The Sabbath is not restricted by what we shouldn't do. It's about what we are freed to do. It's a gift. It's a gift of freedom. Freedom to be with God, freedom to be away from whatever afflictions are going on, from being bent over from whatever reason, from being hungry for spiritual sustenance, from being isolated. It's freedom from those clocks and those schedules and those commitments that rule most of our lives. And it's freedom to look beyond, just like that woman. Instead of navel gazing, it's freedom to see where we all fit in, to see God's creation. Because we are all bent one way or another, or more than one way. Physically, emotionally, spiritually, we're bent. That's the human condition. And that is the condition that Jesus sees. And that's the condition God does not want us to be in. We have those afflictions from which we need to be freed. And God can do that. God does that. But it helps if we're paying attention and we can let go of the other stuff and we can focus on that gift. And then we can experience that freedom that God created and intended for all of us. There's a story that I believe is allegedly set at the beginning of the 20th century, where, at a time when American entrepreneurs were making lots of money, all those self-made men. And one of the cool things to do at that time was you went on safari to darkest Africa. It was exotic, and it was cool, and it proved what a cool person you were, because you could do that. And there's a story about one man who wanted to do that. He was going to be cool. And he had all of his plans laid out. He had his timetables. He knew what he was going to do, when he was going to do it. So he arrives on the continent. He books porters from the village because he's going to need a lot of help, because he brought a few things with him. As you can well imagine, when one is accustomed to having things just right, he needed somebody to carry his cook stove and all of his supplies and all of his wardrobe and, of course, his tent and his bed and all those things that one needs to rough it in the jungle. And he's got it all lined up. And here we go. First day, everybody's bright and early, heading out into the bush. Makes great time. Right on schedule, just doing exactly what he wanted to do. And the story never tells me what it was he wanted to do. Does that sound familiar too? Yeah. First day's great. They make camp that night. He has a sumptuous meal. He goes to bed. He gets up in the morning. Everybody's getting packed up. They get loaded up, and they head into the bush farther, making great time. That night, same thing. Great dinner, great view, great night's sleep. Next morning, the porters pack it up, they pick it up, and they haul it farther into the bush. That night, same thing, make camp. Where is he going again? I'm not clear. The next morning, something went wrong. He's up, he's ready to go, and things aren't moving. They're kind of packed up, but they're not. All of the porters are sitting over here under a tree. And he's going, "You're wasting time. I have a schedule here. I need to get going. Can somebody tell me what's going on?" And the man who had arranged this and was translating for him said, "Well, sir, the porters have decided that they're going to wait here and give their souls time to catch up with their bodies." Does that sound familiar? How often do we charge on to whatever because we got to do it. And we don't give our souls time to keep up with our bodies. That's why God gave us Sabbath. The gift for reconnecting with our soul, the gift of reconnecting with our God, the gift of realizing that freedom of life that God means for us. And it's a chance to stand up and praise God for that gift, for that freedom that He intends. And that gift, that healing, that's a gift we can expect if we're paying attention. Amen. And